crisis in the Holy Land. We hear from a Palestinian Christian about families caught in the crossfire. Detained at the border. Can a political compromise stem the tide of illegal immigrants? Pope Francis is big news. One journalist's explanation for the media's interest in the Vatican. And Pope Francis and his predecessor are on opposite sides in Sunday's World Cup matchup. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July the 11th, 2014. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. As we look at your news now, the death toll continues to rise in the Middle East as the Israeli military is now in day 4 of a massive air campaign against Gaza. More than 100 Palestinians have died since this offensive began. Today, several cities were bombarded, including the southern city of Rafah. Israeli authorities say the airstrikes have hit more than 1,000 targets, including the home of an Islamic Jihad leader. They say the offensive is against Hamas militants, not Palestinian civilians.
We are using all our offensive abilities, not without reasoning, not without thinking, not without taking into account there are civilians in Gaza. We remember there are soldiers there. Hamas has made them into hostages. We continue to attack in the best way: rocket launching sites, headquarters, operative units, tunnels, weapons arsenals. Infrastructures of these operations in Gaza is sinking into its own disaster.
Israel claims most of the ongoing airstrikes are aimed at knocking out potential rocket launching sites. Militants have fired more than 500 rockets against Israel. For the first time since the fighting began, militants have exchanged fire from neighboring Lebanon. Israel also announced today that more than 30,000 troops are preparing for a potential ground offensive. Meanwhile, many people living in Gaza are caught in the crossfire. Our Wyatt Goolsby covers that angle of the story tonight. Wyatt?
Yeah, Brian, think about it this way. In the last few days, the bombarding has happened on average every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes, that's left homes, hospitals, and different places of worship damaged, if not destroyed. But it's the more than 100 Palestinians who have died that's the most concerning for the people in the region.
Thousands of residents of Rafah and the Gaza Strip participated in a joint funeral today for 5 Palestinian family members killed in an Israeli military strike. Panicking residents and rescue workers have had to duck for cover as they search the city for survivors and bodies left in the rubble. The scenes are hard to watch for Dr. Ghassan Tarazi, a Palestinian American whose family migrated to the United States in the 1950s.
The killing of innocent people, civilians, men, women, and children, is done in such a way that people shrug it off.
Tarazi is part of the Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, a group that advocates for Palestinian people among religious organizations. He still has family in Gaza, including a cousin who hears the bombs every day.
The bombs were exploding around her community all night long. They never stopped. As a matter of fact, I saw pictures of children who have cotton put in their ears, taped in their ears, so that they don't hear the explosion, so that they can get some sleep.
Tarazi himself has visited the Holy Land several times with his church in Virginia. He says the vast majority of people are caught in the crossfire and don't support violence from extremists.
On a daily basis, in Gaza, Palestinians, whether they be Christian or Muslim, work together. They don't equate themselves with one faith or the other. They're there and they share the suffering together.
Tarazi says as a Christian, he has hope for the future of the region, even in the darkest times.
Stuff like that now. For right now, though, it looks like this is still far from over. Today, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, says the Israeli military will continue its offensive until the rocket fire out of Gaza stops and won't let international pressure change that. He's also said their military is making every effort to avoid hitting civilians, but Brian, they say extremists are using innocent people as shields, so still a lot of concern for the people living in that region.
We need to pray for them. Thank you, Wyatt. And now some of the other stories our EWTN news team has been covering in today's world. As tensions between Kurds and the Iraqi government deepen, one of Iraq's neighbors is signaling its support today. Egypt's foreign minister visited Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to discuss the threat of Islamic militants. They have plenty to talk about. Earlier this week, al-Maliki accused the Kurds of harboring Sunni militants. The Kurds responded by saying their politicians will boycott cabinet meetings. That situation, of course, continuing to escalate. Here in the U.S., the man charged with killing 6 members of his ex-wife's family collapsed in court as he was arraigned in Texas. His attorney says it appeared 33-year-old Ronald Haskell fainted. He says his defense will focus on Haskell's mental health. Police say Haskell had a history of domestic violence. In fact, his own mother recently sought a restraining order against him. He is accused of killing his ex-wife's sister, her husband, and their children, ranging in age from 4 to 14. Each was shot in the back of the head in their suburban Houston home after refusing to tell Haskell where he could find his ex-wife. Neighbors say Haskell's ex-wife's sister, Katie Stay, was trying to help her make a new start. After their recent divorce, a small memorial has been set up at the family home's front door. The lone survivor of the attack on Wednesday, the slain couple's 15-year-old daughter, suffered a fractured skull, but she was able to call 911. That led to police, or to the suspect for police. A key lawmaker warns the House won't approve President Barack Obama's $3.7 billion emergency request for the border crisis. Republican Hal Rogers, who chairs the Appropriations Committee, says it's too much money. Most of the tens of thousands of immigrants are unaccompanied minors. Some are families, mainly mothers with children. There's a hint tonight, though, of possible compromise in political debate over how to address the crisis. It could result in the quicker deportation of minors arriving from Central America. Some migrants report hearing rumors that once here, they'll be allowed to stay, and Republicans blame the administration policies for those rumors. They're demanding speedier deportations. Now, top House and Senate Democrats are leaving the door open to that possibility, setting up a possible compromise. While greed may drive the smugglers who are trying to sneak illegal immigrants across the border, some of the immigrants are finding kindness when they finally get here. They arrive to a gracious welcome. In recent months, a flood of unaccompanied minors and mothers with their children have crossed the border illegally from Mexico into Texas. Many turn themselves in to U.S. Customs and the Border Patrol, where they are released to await a hearing. That's where volunteers at Sacred Heart Parish in the border city of McAllen step in, giving migrants clothes, showers, meals, a brief respite.
They fear for the lives of their children, and so the moms that we see here are saying that they rather risk the difficulties they will face along the way and what they're going through.
Most come from Central America, like Telma Carcamo and her infant son Adolfo, who made a month-long journey from Honduras. She says she came here to work and earn money to take care of her son and to send back to family. She hopes her next stop is New York, where her mother lives. Others are here traveling through the country trying to reunite with family. Smugglers often tell these migrants to surrender to the Border Patrol, as they'll eventually be released and allowed to go to their destination. For the many who make it across the river, there are countless numbers of people and children stranded in Mexican border towns. This 13-year-old, who Mexican authorities asked us not to identify, made it as far as Reynosa, Mexico, before authorities raided a warehouse that smugglers controlled, taking her and her sister. The Mexican Integral Family Development Agency shelters are overflowing. The number of children from Central America being processed at this facility has gone up 40 to 60% in comparison with last year. The teens often tell the same story. They're fleeing to reunite with parents and escape the gangs threatening them back home. Hispanic leaders on Capitol Hill are speaking out about the crisis on the border. Today, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus made an emotional appeal to President Obama.
I want the president to be as bold and generous as Republicans have been petty and mean-spirited on immigration.
Just yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with nuns from New Mexico. And the group shared with me a horrific story that happened in Honduras, where there was a child that was being threatened to join one of the gangs in the area. When the family intervened and confronted the gang, the entire family was mutilated. Remember what's happening to these kids. Pray for these kids, and let's make sure that we keep them at the center of all of our decisions.
These pleas come as the House denies President's request for $3.7 billion to address the border crisis, saying it is too much money. California bishops are expressing solidarity with migrants who end up in their state. They're asking people to pray for a peaceful and just solution to the crisis. We're joined tonight by David Drucker, the senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. This issue's bounced back and forth all week long, David. Can you tell us where each party stands with what it's trying to do here?
Well, Democrats support the president, who wants $3.7 billion in emergency funding to help deal with the crisis at the border. And the president, according to Republicans, is mostly dealing with issues other than border security. And so what Republicans are going to do is take the president's request and they're going to refine it to look like something they can support, something that's less than $3.7 billion, but still includes some elements that the president wants, and a lot more measures to deal with border security. And then it's a matter of whether they can get an agreement with Senate Democrats, and whether the president will sign on or they'll find a compromise. The administration signaled today they're willing to compromise, and I think they will do something and do it rather quickly, just given that this is a crisis.
When do you think this compromise is going to emerge, and what will it look like?
Well, it'll come before the August recess. As you know, at the end of July, Congress adjourns for 5 weeks, heads home to campaign and get ready for the elections. We'll see more action out of the House next week, and that's where you want to look, because Senate Democrats will generally do what the president wants on an issue like immigration. And so, look for the price tag that Republicans put on this, and look for that border group that House Speaker John Boehner put together. What the Republicans in the House do is largely going to reflect the recommendations brought to Speaker Boehner by the working group of House Republicans that he put together.
I want to get your quick take on the Democratic senators yesterday basically defying the Supreme Court, saying we're going to pass some legislation because we don't like the decision on Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood. Do you think they're going to get anywhere with this?
No. I mean, surprise, surprise. This is an election year, and Democrats are looking for a way to motivate their Democratic base, and specifically women voters, who we know vote generally in greater numbers than Republicans, than men. And you've had more single female voters than you used to, and they tend to vote Democratic. And so Democrats are looking for anything you can. Now, look, they do disagree with the Supreme Court's decision. They do think that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and those those regulations forcing certain kinds of birth control to be covered were legal and constitutional. But what they're doing isn't going anywhere in a Republican House, probably not even in a Senate that requires 60 votes. But it's good politics for them. At least that's their opinion.
They put on a good show. Thanks. David Drucker with the Washington Examiner. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Coming up, what the church is doing for countries in the midst of war and violence. And media interest in the Catholic Church is peaking. One journalist who covers the Vatican explores the Francis effect. Check out the cartoon drawn by Vatican reporter Edward Penton for the newspaper called Irish Catholic. Edward also works for our news partner, the National Catholic Register. I love that. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and you're watching EWTN News Nightly, and we're all watching Pope Francis, the man in white, the successor of St. Peter. He's all over the news. Jason Calvi joins us now with more on what we're calling the Francis effect.
That's right, Brian. You know, Times Person of the Year. The one who rides in the Pope-mobile is also driving a boom for the media.
The Vicar of Christ's smile touches the world. His actions melt hearts. He now has more than 14 million followers on Twitter, in English, Arabic, even Latin, and the most in Spanish. He's rocked the cover of Rolling Stone, and even one of the Holy Father's closest advisors is studying Francis.
Books that you're reading right now that you want to share with us?
Yes, I am reading a book on Francis the Pope.
Search Amazon for books on Pope Francis. You'll find about 800 results. Then there's all the news.
Rome, and specifically the Vatican right now, is the only boomtown in journalism that I know of outside of a war zone. Outlets have been adding correspondents who hadn't had correspondents there before. They've been increasing their coverage. There's an inexhaustible interest in Francis and anything he does.
And that means more people are reading reports from Vatican journalists like Francis Rocca.
I see reaction to our pieces from secular colleagues in the secular press and just readers who don't ordinarily read the Catholic press.
Since Pope Francis's election, EWTN's website has seen a 70% surge in visits. All this interest is keeping journalists busy.
It's obviously nice also to be reporting a story that the rest of the world is greeting very favorably. I mean, this isn't only bad news about the church.
And then there's Facebook. Thousands of people stopping by the EWTN Facebook page have liked posts featuring the Holy Father. Just to give you one example, this post behind me reached 129,000 people saw this particular image, and about 10,000 people liked it. Brian?
All right, thank you. We like the fact that Pope Francis makes news a lot since we are a Catholic network. It certainly gives us a lot of material to work with, and we're glad to welcome back Kathryn Jean Lopez, a senior fellow at the National Review Institute, director of Catholic Voices USA. You work in the media, Kathryn. Have you seen this Francis effect in your work?
Absolutely. I used to cover Catholic issues a lot, and people would wonder, why does she keep writing about the Catholic Church? Now people want more. They want to understand what's going on. Sometimes they're confused. Sometimes they just they desire more because they like what they see of Pope Francis. And so much of what he does is invitational. And what you're seeing is people responding to that, and again, just sort of wanting more and wanting to understand more about the church, which is such a new thing where in the media particularly, we've been in such a defensive mode for so long, and there's something different happening now.
And you get the sense that he's not trying to do any of this. It's just sort of natural for him. Isn't that one of the things that makes it so attractive?
I think so. And I think the authenticity is something that people are responding to, because it does seem to come so naturally. And you really see the work of the Holy Spirit in so much of what he's doing, because you even see how everyone is a little uncomfortable, even as they're interested.
And how do you think people are responding in the mainstream?
Well, and I should add, when I say people are uncomfortable, it's that they're challenged, right?
Yes.
You see so much of his gestures. That's what's invitational about him. And when you listen to his morning homilies, you can't walk away, the ones he gives at Santa Marta, you can't walk away not feeling your conscience being pinged a little bit, and so that's the gospel at work. That's the Holy Spirit at work, and yeah, you even just the other day when the Holy Father met with those victims of sexual abuse, you saw incredibly fair treatment from mainstream media. The New York Times main piece was a fair piece. Something
Finally.
Yeah, right.
Finally.
Well, thanks be to God,
Yeah.
right? Because people are being able to hear the story.
Kathryn Jean Lopez, thanks for joining us.
Brian.
Love your take. Thanks. The head of the church's arm of humanitarian relief is now voicing concern over the lack of aid being provided to people affected by war and violence.
The whole Middle East right now is at stake, and there are people dying of hunger or, ill-nourished or malnourished. And in Syria, among the displaced people that are not reachable by the humanitarian organizations.
Caritas serves the poor worldwide, especially in the developing world. They also respond to humanitarian crises in war-torn nations. The group urges the faithful to get involved to break what it calls the cycle of indifference. Well, in many parts of the world where Caritas works, a deadly illness is causing fear and even death. Our Catherine Elliott reports.
This is the mosquito that spreads dengue fever. It's a disease that brings fever, joint pain, headaches, and bleeding to about 100 million people every year.
If you've ever seen an epidemic of dengue in a hospital, the wards are overflowing. People are literally lying in the corridors. And in some countries, patients are triaged in tents.
It's a tropical disease found across Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
It affects all ages.
And there's no known treatment, so wards like this fill up with repeat offenders.
We know from dengue epidemiology that a second infection can end up being worse than the first infection, and this is due to remaining antibodies that occurred during the first infection.
But today, scientists are announcing they're ready to bring the world's first dengue vaccine to market.
This vaccine has created antibodies in response to the vaccine, which is what we hope for.
This animation shows how it works. Once in the bloodstream, the vaccine activates the immune system to make antibodies that attack the virus. Scientists recently gave the shot to 10,000 children in countries at risk. The success rate, 56%.
As a scientist, I would love it to be 100%, and typically vaccines have a much higher efficacy than 56%. But in the absence of anything else, this is at least a little bit of good news.
It's not a perfect solution, but the drug makers could apply for regulatory approval as early as next year, bringing dengue patients one step closer to recovery. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, they call him King James. Is the NBA superstar going back to Cleveland? Pope Francis is a huge soccer fan. The Pope Emeritus, not so much. Their native lands meet in Sunday's World Cup Championship. This is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and the U.S. puts more people in prison per capita than any other nation. But the U.S. Sentencing Commission recently voted to reduce the recommended length of prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenders. The commission votes later this month on whether to apply that retroactively to more than 50,000 federal drug offenders now in prison. Faith leaders have weighed in on the issue this week. We have two of them with us tonight. Anthony Granato, Policy Advisor for the U.S. Catholic Bishop's Office of Domestic Social Development, and Kara Gotch, Director of Advocacy at the Interfaith Criminal Justice Coalition. Anthony, what are the Catholic bishops saying about this issue?
Well, quite frankly, they're saying that it's time to fix our nation's broken incarceration and sentencing policies. We incarcerate as a country more than any other nation in the Western developed world at a great cost, both financially and in human lives. And it's a situation that requires a just response. So that's kind of where the bishops are looking at these issues.
This goes beyond the Catholic Church too. Kara, you are working with an organization that involves a number of religious denominations. Where are they united on this?
Well, they're united in the principle that we believe in human dignity, and people who are in prison are not forsaken. We need to be concerned about how they're treated. We need to be concerned about that they're be treated fairly, and our current sentencing system is unjust and unfair.
But you know people are going to argue with the lightening of penalties for recreational use of drugs, in some cases legalizing it, with shorter sentences for drug offenders. Aren't we just feeding into the drug culture?
I would say that the issue is that our current sentencing guidelines, our current structure of incarceration is disproportionate. It unjustly targets poor people, African Americans and minorities, for nonviolent drug crimes. So the punishment, the bishops have long said, must fit the crime. And even in our moral tradition, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Summa recommends, he says, you know, punishment is not for its own sake. It must have a corrective measure. And I think that's what the bishops are trying to say, is that we have a disproportionate application of punishment in our sentencing policies.
And Kara, does your coalition address the issue of helping these offenders rather than just releasing them from prison?
Well, absolutely. Most of the organizations, the faith organizations that I work with, have prison ministry. They have strong relationships with family members of people who are incarcerated, and they have programs to welcome people home from incarceration. And so they have volunteered countless hours with helping to restore lives and make sure people are rehabilitated.
Well, it costs billions to incarcerate people, but this really is not what this is about so much. It's not really about money, is it?
For the bishops, this is about life and dignity of the human person. Fundamental to all Catholic social teaching is a human life and dignity. And we see broken lives, broken families, broken system that has pretty deleterious effects on society and the justice of our country.
All right, Anthony Granato and Kara Gotch, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, moving on to big sports news tonight. It is being called, rather, the Decision 2.0. LeBron James returning home to Cleveland, reversing his dramatic move to Miami 4 years ago. Loyal Cavs fans were shocked with his defection to the Heat. King James tells Sports Illustrated today he now realizes his relationship with Northeast Ohio is bigger than basketball. You might remember our recent story about Catholic cartoonist Jason Bach, who mixes drawing with theology. Seems his cartoons predicted Sunday's World Cup face-off between the home teams of Pope Francis and Pope Emeritus Benedict. Last month, he created a comic strip with the two popes at a papal viewing party depicting Pope Francis defending Argentina's wonderful flexibility and Benedict arguing that Germany's team has stronger fundamentals. Meanwhile, people all over the globe will tune in to watch the World Cup finals on Sunday, and Kathryn Zeltner has that story.
When Argentina and Germany face off in the World Cup final, it'll pit one of the world's best players against the world's hottest team. Lionel Messi hopes to lead Argentina to its third World Cup title and first since 1986. He helped his team defeat Netherlands by way of penalty kicks in the semifinals. Germany looked unstoppable in its semifinal win, embarrassing host country Brazil 7-1. They're looking for their fourth win and first since 1990. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is confident in her country's team and predicted a win was, quote, doable. Sunday's matchup could also be getting some extra attention in Vatican City, where both Pope Francis from Argentina and Pope Emeritus Benedict of Germany reside. Francis once met with the Argentina team and was gifted a jersey. Germany also got a bump from the animal kingdom. An elephant has predicted a World Cup win by kicking balls into a goal. Kathryn Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Kathryn. Remember to join the Vatican's Pause for Peace initiative. On Twitter, use the hashtag Pause for Peace this Sunday as Germany plays Argentina for the championship. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, watch us again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. Good night and God bless you.